It's the sunset year for McFarlane Toys with the DC license, and he can either go out on top or sink down low. See, not a whole lot of fanfare was made about this Platinum Chase variant of the Spawn Batman figure. Basically a retool of sorts that is more or less lifted from the Batman Spawn 2-pack that came out a little while back, but this time with a Platinum Chase color variation, this time sporting a lighter gray, a navy blue with a little bit of yellow accents. And the reason for why I'm kind of utilizing this figure as a form of retrospective of where we're currently at with the state of McFarlane Toys and the DC license, and specifically Batman figures, is because I came across this guy at a Target just completely on a whim. I literally went in there just to kind of find some peanut butter bites from Skippy's because they had an offer and I wanted some, and lo and behold, there it was. And I thought to myself, is this a return? Is this a clearance? Am I looking correctly? And the reason for why that is because not only was, like I said, this guy kind of shadow dropped, just basically a Batman Spawn 1996 Batman figure, but the Platinum Chase variant. And the reason for why I had to double take is because the box in and of itself was missing the Platinum sticker. And I thought to myself, oh, some bastard kid. I'm sorry. I know, it really irks me when kids just start screwing with figures of any kind in the toy aisles and they never bother to either clean up after themselves or the parents don't do anything about it. But then I got a little closer and then I realized that if you take a strong gander, you realize that this is actually a factory defect. This is the legitimate McFarlane sticker, but it's missing the actual reflective lamination or sheet that goes underneath in between like the adhesive and the actual, laminated part of the sticker. And so I'm thinking to myself, are these things getting kind of pooped out, or are these things being rushed to market? Is again McFarlane going into some kind of panic control to get certain variations just to kind of squeeze as much of the DC license and specifically Batman as much as he can? Because for the longest time, I was really giving McFarlane the benefit of the doubt, saying that, okay, yeah, you guys don't like the 7-inch, you guys want consistency, you guys want to keep it within the 6-inch market, but at the same time, a bigger figure also means a bigger canvas. You can have bigger articulation, it feels much more compact, and I always think about the value proposition within the box, especially when you pick up a very hefty box like this guy turned out to be when I threw him in my bag, because I was thinking to myself, okay, $22.99, and he's feeling pretty weighty. But then once you factor in how massive the cape is, and in fact, that's the majority of where the weight really gets distributed to, it's this massive cape, which frankly, I'll go ahead and just spoil, is probably the biggest detriment of this figure. It makes the whole figure feel pretty top heavy, it's very rigid, it doesn't really have a whole lot of flexibility. It harkens back to the times of having the rubberized cape as opposed to the clothy wired capes that he's going for in recent times, and kind of gives a reason for why we jumped from the $20 price tag to the $22.99 price tag, and I was justifying that for a good while. So here I was thinking like, okay, yeah, you have an awful lot of girth, you have this presence, but man, oh man, did it take me a while to get him to get properly standing for this review in and of themselves. At one point, I thought to myself, am I going to really utilize the circular base for this review? Because, man, he was giving me some trouble because this thing was just going in different kind of directions and not giving him a really strong point of balance. But thankfully, I was able to find it, and yeah, it's making the figure feel quite antiquated. And speaking of antiquation, we then get to the next major factor as to why I was so hesitant to pick this guy up back when he was part of the Spawn Batman 2-pack, because I don't know if many of you know about this, but I never really bothered to pick that version up. I came so close multiple times. I saw it at the full MSRP, but there was just something that just always kept me at bay. I don't know if it was because of the screaming head sculpt that he came with, or the fact that at $50 you're kind of forced to pick up a Spawn figure. And sure, the Spawn figure in and of itself doesn't really look all that terrible, but I don't know. It was just not a major priority for me at the time. There were other releases that I wanted to put more focus on, whether it be from McFarlane or even on the Marvel Legends side. I can't remember, but just time escaped me. And then eventually there were some sales, and even then I still wasn't compelled. And then at one point it was actually a free redeemable gift for those rewards points that you have on the McFarlane Toy Store website. And time after time, again, I had the points, and I thought about redeeming them, but then just right when I was about to, McFarlane would announce a pre-order, and I would utilize the points to then get like $10 off or $20 off a pre-order and get free shipping. And then there was one instance, 1 week, where I was like, you know what? Let me go ahead and pick up that 2-pack. And then I went in there, they took it off. It was no longer a free gift. It was no longer redeemable for those points. They swapped it out for some other 2-packs. And I was like, God damn it. That would have been a perfect opportunity there to finally get that review under my belt. And so months later, here we are with the singular release. And I thought to myself, okay, at least I can kind of bypass the need for a Spawn figure to be included. I'm able to kind of mitigate a little bit of the price. But then I started to mess with the figure itself, the actual joints, the actual body. And then that's where it kind of dawned on me, oh yeah, this is why I was so hesitant with that original 2-pack. It's because effectively he's just a retool of both the Hushbuck and also the Three Jokers. A little bit of the Three Jokers with the chest plating that's going on right here, specifically the upper torso piece and that bat symbol. You can kind of recognize a little bit of the sculpting happening right there, which is a decent sculpt, but you'll realize that that shade of the gray being much lighter than the original Spawn version is probably what brings the attention and kind of struck my memory and made me go, okay, yeah, it's Three Jokers happening quite an awful lot right there. I did notice that I do like the hooks that are happening right here with the sculpting on the top part, even though that manages to limit a little bit of the articulation happening with the top arms. But at least I like the dynamic, kind of sculpted nature that makes it kind of lifted from those cover pages, specifically to that Batman Spawn crossover. And I do notice that the only little modification that they brought to the cape was this piece right here that's now coiled and sculpted to kind of go outward rather than inward like the original Batman Spawn 2-pack. That's practically the only major variance, but on top of that, I distinctly recognize the legs and the arms being directly lifted from the Hushbuck, and even the bottom torso, the abdominal piece, with those specific kind of wrinkles of the fabric that they still managed to etch in right there beautifully and kind of make it a little lifelike as far as the clothing. But make no mistake, that's pretty much what you're finding right there. And so you're going to recognize an awful lot of the tooling being pretty similar. It's really about the color scheming and whether or not that's going to work for you. And frankly, I would argue that that's practically what worked for me and what probably motivated me to pick him up in the store, because when it comes to the Batman Spawn iteration, I would say that maybe this color scheming works a little bit more for me than it did originally with that muted gray, that super darker gray, kind of almost like a dark blue-greenish gray that he had going on for that original 2-pack, and the straightforward black for the cowl, the cape, and then of course that original version had the screaming head sculpt along with the elongated ears that I just wasn't the biggest fan of. So to see that he's got a much more neutral scowl happening on his expression there, but then you have a much more complementary skin tone to the mouth plate, the eyes, and then shorter ears. There's something about this cowl and this head sculpt that I do like a little better. Even if said head is that typical joint at the bottom of the neck as opposed to the top, so it is going to feel pretty limited and stagnant when it comes to articulation, because rotation is rather difficult. It is achievable at the full 360, but you can hear very audible squeaking via this top part of the cape that is pretty much encroaching all over the neck and the shoulder. So therefore, being able to rotate the head is going to be a little resistant and a little tight. Now, tilting downwards is absolutely no problem. You can almost flex all the way down like you see before you, but when it comes to flexing and tilting up, he pretty much stops looking straight forward. He can in no way, shape, or form look up whatsoever, and tilting side to side is also incredibly limited. So that's a little unfortunate, and it gets even worse for the top arms, which are of course going to be able to move up only about that far, and almost virtually none back due to the way that this rather rigid cape completely closes it off entirely. And an extension towards the sides is kind of done, but you can see right there that it's starting to bounce back into place due to the way that the cape is really kind of forcing it to. Nevertheless, though, the biceps are able to rotate in place 360, just like those Hush models were able to do prior. Two joints at the elbows that are fully able to bend all the way up, though one of them is a little on the right-sided side due to the way that the bicep is constructed and the tooling is, so do take that in mind. Now, because of how much, like I mentioned before, antiquated the overall body sculpt is, you're going to find an awful lot of joints that are a little bit on the older side when it comes to McFarlane's DC tenure. And so you're going to have those ball joints at the wrists that do allow the hands to kind of flex inwards and outwards a good amount and obviously rotate, but they're also not going to be as flush to the body as I would like them to be. And while we're on the subject, the ankles are of course going to be those ball joints that I am not the biggest fan of, but nevertheless, you could allow them to pivot upwards and downwards, as well as being able to rotate either at the top or kind of pivot at the bottom. They're a little bit looser at the bottom than they are at the top, but the movement could be achieved. You're just going to have to futz and play around with them a little bit. Then when it comes to the mid-torso, you are able to fully rotate 360, but of course, this cape, man, you kind of have to just like do it from within the fingers like so, because this cape is just going to get in your way oh so much. And when it comes to any kind of flexibility or tilting, again, the cape just kind of gets in the way. And ab crunching, because of the way that this Hush/Three Jokers mid-torso tooling is designed, there's just an awful lot working against it rather than in favor of it. So crunching is practically not really that possible or not really happening there. You can kind of feel it moving ever so slightly, and some slight tilting side to side, but it's mainly towards the back where it can flex a little bit more comfortably. It's just a shame that you can't really do so much of it because of the way that the cape is designed and in place. So that's a bummer. But the waist is still allowing a little bit more flexibility and rotation all the way around, as you can kind of see it right about right there, and a little bit more flexibility as far as crunching from side to side or in any other directions like so. Then when it comes to the top legs, of course, because of the way that the diaper, you can kind of flex the legs high up like that, but you can see that the tooling for the knees are just a little strange. That kind of causes this rather grotesque appearance. So just a little bit of a bummer, and just be careful when it comes to flexing a little bit of the knees, which do have two joints that can fully flex all the way up, but again, the cape is going to get in the way just a tad bit right there, so do be careful. And again, the tooling, it just feels kind of off and weird when it comes to bottom legs. Again, I don't know if maybe this was just crunched out from the factory. I don't know if they changed suppliers with the plastic, but you'll notice that, again, the legs just feel funky, especially when it comes to extension. You can technically still extend them off to the sides, but you'll notice that when pressing them back, they kind of flush a little weirdly. See that right there? So I don't know. There's just so much weird finagling happening that getting this guy to be sort of posed in any kind of very neat looking way, and then on top of that you add a little bit of the top heaviness of that cape, it's just not the most pleasant experience. I dig the color scheming. I dig the overall, aesthetic that they went for this Batman Spawn crossover. It's just that I wish that the figure itself was receiving just a little bit more love, but again, being that it's a reissue from that 2-pack, I don't know, maybe I was just a little naive in picking it up, and maybe it was a little bit of that feeling of like, ooh, finding a relatively new-ish Batman figure in store. And trying to get some of this weird balancing and the articulation happening within this bug is not really helped or worsened per se by the included accessories, which is an extra set of hands, one fisted and one grabbing, so that then he can hold the rather oversized but yet slightly generic Batarang that he's got going on right here. All three color-coded to match the same blue that he's got on the figure itself. But again, I don't know exactly, maybe I was overtaken by just sheer, I don't want to say nostalgia glasses, but just kind of harkening back to that classic feeling of walking into a Target or a Walmart. You're not necessarily in the hunt, but you just get that little bit of a whimsical, bright surprise of finding a brand new Batman figure that you've never seen before, especially one that wasn't really called too much attention to by the McFarlane Toys distributor themselves. Only to then kind of play around with it and think to yourself, I'm really, really hoping that this guy, like a lot of people like to mention in the comments, was in production and was simply just a checklist item that McFarlane wanted to, again, poop out there before moving on to the greener pastures prior to the breakout news of Mattel getting the DC license back. So I'm hoping that this guy was kind of coming down the pipeline, and maybe that's why he wasn't really showcased in some kind of like pre-order announcement via social media, or something that was maybe in a live stream, specifically with some of these recent McFarlane Toy Show episodes that they've been doing, or the Walmart con, etc. And therefore, he was simply just shipped out to brick and mortar stores, or specifically Target, to be a platinum chase for that collectability factor. But then again, it's also difficult to not rule out the possibility, again, unless one of us was a fly in that room when they were having these meetings, because a lot of you like to pretend that you are, unless you truly were in that room. It's difficult to not rule out the possibility that maybe this is a panic choice, or a panic decision, a panic release, after the news broke that Mattel was getting that DC license back. It's possible that maybe that decision was made months ago prior to the announcement, and since then McFarlane says, well, I gotta get these Batman done as much as possible. That blue one, that one from the Spawn 2-pack, now let's release that as a singular release, change up the color, and there you go, $22.99. And here's the thing, I recognize that I still bought it, but that's mainly because I never had that original black and gray version that came in the Spawn 2-pack. Frankly, I feel like if I had gotten that 2-pack and that was already under my possession, I probably would have passed on this guy, because I recognized that as being the same one. But the stars kind of aligned, and thought to myself, well, there's got to be something to say about this release, whether it's for better or for worse. And I feel like here it is on the worrisome side, and I can only really hope for the best as this tenure for McFarlane with the DC license winds down, that we don't get too much of this, and we can really get down to the line of requests and wish lists that people have, myself included, that we genuinely do want to see. And I'm hoping that Todd, Brian, AJ, everybody that's part of that team over there at McFarlane Toys will go watch videos like this, maybe not mine specifically, but people that are, predominant voices in the community, and go down line of the wish list that people really want to see, even if it's outside of Batman, like I mentioned before, Watchmen, being able to see Creature Commandos in the full 7-inch DC Multiverse fully articulated scale, and not just statues, etc., etc. And then, of course, giving us Panther suits for Kilmer, a proper Panther suit from the majority of that movie. The Batfleck from Justice League, and then of course moving on to some of those Batmobiles, maybe giving the Arkham series that proper treatment that it deserves, and maybe finally retire the Nightfall Buck, the Hush Buck, and the Three Jokers Buck. All right, we've got them. All right, it's done. And I get it, you still got that Rainbow release on the horizon, but hopefully once we bring those to market, those things get put out from the factory, we can really focus on what people genuinely want, so that McFarlane can end on a high. Because this guy does present a little bit of a worrisome note. Don't give in to the FOMO simply because he is a Platinum Chase figure that feeds into the collectability factor. Hell, that Platinum Chase sticker might not even be on the box like the case was with mine, which is a huge shame, but at the same time, when am I ever going to get another opportunity to speak on this version of the figure? Let me know what you guys think about where McFarlane is in the comment section. I mean, many of you have made your voices very clear. Many of you want to see him lose the license. Many of you want to see him keep the license. But at the same time, we really need to keep our minds open as far as what Mattel can do, which could be bad, but it could also be good, because I do subscribe to the notion that their WWE factors, those Ultimate Series, etc., all that stuff is actually pretty top-notch. So if they can maybe retain that quality, that tooling, that design, those technologies that they learn and apply it to something from within the DC universe, yeah, I could see potential within that, but only time will tell. For now, though, I'm curious to see and hear what you guys have to say down in the comment section. While you guys are down there, hit the thumbs up button if you enjoyed this review, thumbs down if you did not, and as always, stay humble, and I'll catch you guys later.